Welcome to part two of Steel and Velvet Counseling. My name is Dr. Dave Jones. This is a follow up to part one. We were talking in our podcast about everything you think you know about addiction is wrong. And it follows very closely the book written by Johann Hari entitled Chasing the Screams. And so this is a continuation of that effort. So in counseling, one of the first things I thought about was that my job was basically to say to a drug addict, why don't you just stop taking drugs? And one guy explained to me very beautifully. He said, well, think about that for a moment. What would I do if I stopped taking drugs? Maybe I could get a job myself as a janitor or something like that. Compare that, he said, to what I'm doing right now, which is really exciting, because I've got friends down here and we do exciting things like rob stores and hang around with hookers. Suddenly you are part of a world where, together with other addicts, you are embarked on a crusade, a constant, frenetic crusade to steal enough to buy the drugs, dodge the police, keep out of jail, and stay alive. If your problem is being chronically starved of social bonds, then part of the solution is to bond with the heroin itself and the relief it gives you. But a bigger part is to bond with the subculture that comes with taking heroin. The tribe of fellow users, all embarked on the same mission and facing the same threats and risking death every day with you. It gives you an identity. It gives you a life of highs and lows instead of relentless monotony. The heroin helps users deal with the pain of being able to form normal bonds with other humans. The heroin subculture gives them bonds with other human beings. Remember, when the actual heroin was gone, they carried on acting as heroin addicts. The horrifying fact is that it's a lot better to be a junkie than to be nothing at all. And that's the alternative these guys face, being nothing at all. So when the heroin was cut off, they maintained the essence of their heroin addiction, which is a subculture addiction. When you have been told you are useless all your life, embracing the identity of being useless, embracing the other pieces of uselessness, living openly as useless, it seems better than being alone. This is a life. It's better than no life. So this brings us to the point that the opposition of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection. It's all I can offer. It's all that will help someone in the end. If you are alone, you cannot escape addiction. If you are loved, you have a chance. For 100 years, we have been singing war songs about addicts. All along, we should have been singing love songs to them. You don't need a chemical, you need a connection. So I go to the people I love and sit with them. I listen to them. I try as hard as I can to be present in that moment, not someplace in the past or future. And I have found so far that the impulse passes in time. If you are alone, you are vulnerable to addiction. And if you are alone, you are vulnerable to the drug war. But if you take the first step and find others who agree with you, if you make a connection, you lose your vulnerability and you start to win. It slowly became clear to me that all over the world, people are particularly hungry for three things. The first is a message of love and compassion toward people with addictions. The second is a desperate need to end the violence caused by the ongoing decision to criminalize drugs. And the third is evidence about how the alternatives can actually work in practice. So this explains very clearly that countries that punish people with addictions have the worst outcomes. And everything they think about addiction is wrong. There's a lot of truth in the criticisms of the drug companies. Almost all drugs are overprescribed in the United States, and it's madness that people go to the emergency room with a slightly burned thumb and go home with a month's supply of Percocet. Most of the people with back pain in the U.S., for example, need a course of yoga and Pilates alongside free health programs so they can lose weight in cities where it's possible to walk and bike around, not OxyContin. The drug companies told people that these drugs were largely risk-free, which was appalling and false, and they set up financial incentive structures to maximize the number of doctors who would hand them out, even when, as in many cases, there were better options that could be pursued. They find it unbearable to be present in their lives because their lives are too painful, and so they are seeking a form of relief and release. What changes the amount of distress in the society? In 18th century England, many people, the ones worst affected by the gin craze, had been deprived of the things that made life meaningful to them. They were in terrible psychological pain, and so they turned to the best anesthetics to hand. What does it mean to be connected? Are you just talking about social connections like friendships, or is it something wider and deeper? If you want to understand why so many people are taking painkillers, you have to understand why so many people are in so much pain. And psychological pain is as real as physical pain. It is not a coincidence that opiate addiction is dramatically higher in West Virginia, where people have lost their communities, their economic security, and their sense of status, than among, say, the student body at Harvard, despite the fact that on average Harvard students have much better health insurance and so would find it easier to get hold of prescription opiates. The places with the biggest opioid crisis are also places where the highest suicide rates and the highest antidepressant prescriptions, which help us to see that what was really going on is an epidemic of deep disconnection. You need to feel you belong. You need to feel your life has meaning and purpose. You need to feel you have a future that makes sense. Our culture is good at lots of things, but we have been getting less and less good at meeting these deep underlying psychological needs, and this is the key driver of that crisis. In Switzerland, if you are addicted to an opiate, the authorities do two things. They prescribe the opioid you're addicted to for as long as you feel you need it, and at the same time they give you a huge amount of love and practical support to deal with the reasons you are in such distress. They get you decent housing and a job and extensive therapy. What almost all the people I met who are addicted to Oxy or Percocet want and need is to go to Switzerland, to be given a stable, secure prescription to those drugs alongside massive social and psychological supports to deal with their underlying distress so they can in time leave the drug behind to beat this crisis. They did it by dealing with the reasons people wanted the drug in the first place. I had learned that there is overwhelming evidence that depression, anxiety, and addiction are responses to deep social forces that are arising around us. For example, the less control you have over your work, the more likely you are to despair. Or to name another, as your society becomes more unequal, you are more likely to feel insecure and humiliated, and therefore more likely to become depressed or anxious. Our brains change as a result of how we live our lives. London taxi drivers, for example, have to memorize the map of London in a fiendishly difficult test to get their licenses. Their brains look different in scans to yours or mine, not because being a taxi driver is a brain disease, but because they are using their brains differently, and that physically alters them. Your brain is reshaped by social forces. You can't find a simple, symbolic solution to a social and spiritual crisis. I know it's hard to admit the reality of what we are facing. The drug war and the addiction crisis are symptoms of a deeply disconnected culture, and we need to begin the long and difficult work of healing that culture. The places that ended their drug wars and dramatically reduced their addiction problems began with this very insight and carefully constructed alternatives based on putting love into practice. It is only by connecting with others in a spirit of love that we can find our way out of a crisis built on disconnection and despair. When any of us begins to approach the world in the spirit of compassion and connection, you will find people who will be open to you. They combine your love with their own. They will connect it with thousands of other points of light, ones you never even knew existed. This is the only force that can end this war and end this epidemic of addiction. And the misdirected response that we call a war on drugs, it involves courage. And courage calls to courage everywhere. They are waiting for you, all these amazing people in your life, they are waiting for you to join them.